There's a kind of cold that doesn't bite, it waits. I've ridden through 40 winters in the Quill River country, and I've learned to tell the two apart. The mean cold snaps at your fingers and your nose and lets you know it's there. The patient cold just sits in the air, quiet and clean, and waits for you to make one wrong choice, to take the shortcut, to trust the sky, to think you've got more daylight than you do. That second kind is the one that buries people. And up in those mountains, the snow keeps its secrets the way a careful woman keeps hers, deep and silent and longer than you'd believe. What I'm about to tell you, I've only told a handful of folks, and most of them didn't believe me. I don't blame them. If a man had ridden up to me talking about a cabin that wasn't on any map, hidden behind a wall of black timber where no sane person would build, a cabin with a woman in it who'd been waiting out the worst winter in living memory with 2 bobbies and a rifle, and not much else, I'd have figured he'd been too long in the saddle and let the loneliness get into his head. But I was there. I saw her face in the doorway. I heard what she said to me when she thought I'd come to take something from her. And I learned, the way a man learns things he can never quite set down again, that the strongest person I'd ever meet in my life wouldn't be some gunfighter or some preacher or some cattle baron with 1,000 head and a name folks feared. It'd be a woman in a wool shawl, half-starved, standing between her children and the whole white weight of the mountain, and not stepping back an inch. This is her story. I just happened to be the fool who rode into the middle of it. Stay with me, because the part that haunts me isn't how I found her. It's what she'd already decided to do, the morning before I came. The first thing I lost was the trail. The second thing I nearly lost was Juno, and after that I quit counting. I had 11 head of stray cattle somewhere ahead of me in the timber, or I thought I did. By the time the snow came down thick enough to swallow the world, I couldn't have told you if there were 11 cows up that slope or 11 ghosts. Both make about the same amount of noise in a blizzard, which is to say none at all. The wind takes everything. It takes sound first, then your sense of which way is down, and if you let it, it'll take your wits last and your life right after. Juno knew before I did. She's a good mare, a sorrel with one white sock and an opinion about everything, and when she stopped on that ridge and laid her ears flat and wouldn't go forward, I should have listened to her the way a smart man listens to his wife. Instead, I gave her a nudge with my heel and said, "Go on, you old crow, it's just weather," which is the kind of thing a man says right before the weather proves him a liar. We weren't 50 yards on when the ground went out from under us. Wasn't a cliff. I want to be honest about that because everybody who tells a story like this wants there to be a cliff. There wasn't. It was a snow-buried wash, a gully maybe 12 feet deep, and the lip of it had drifted over smooth and white as a tablecloth so a man couldn't see where the solid ground stopped being solid. Juno's front legs broke through. She screamed. A horse scream is a thing you don't forget, and we both went down into that gully in a tangle of legs and snow and my own cussing. I came up with my hat gone and my left wrist singing and one boot full of snow already melting into a cold that went straight to the bone. Juno scrambled up out of the drift, shaking, blowing hard, but she stood. Standing was the important part. A horse that stands is a horse that'll carry you. A horse that doesn't is the start of a much worse afternoon. I checked her legs with my good hand. Sound. By some mercy, sound. I leaned my forehead against her neck for a second and breathed in that smell, wet horse and cold leather, a smell that's meant home to me my whole life, and I said, quiet, all right, girl, I'm sorry. You were right and I was a fool and I'll say so to anybody who asks. She didn't forgive me. Horses hold grudges longer than mules and twice as long as women, but she let me get the reins, and that was enough. Now I keep a little book. I should tell you that because it matters later and because it's the kind of habit that makes folks look at a man sideways. It's a leather tally book, worn soft as a glove, and I've kept one like it since I was a boy. I write down the weather and the count of the herd and how much hay's left and which fence wants mending. Numbers mostly. My father used to say a man who writes down his troubles can stop carrying them in his head, and there's something to that. That afternoon, hunkered in that gully with my fingers gone the color of skim milk. I took the book out from inside my coat where I keep it dry, and I wrote, and my hand shook so bad the letters looked like a child's. Snow before noon. Lost the strays. Lost the trail. Bad wrist. If somebody finds this book and not me, the cattle are Hollies's, the mare's nobody's, and I'd be obliged if you'd see her fed. Then I closed it and put it away, because writing your own farewell is a thing you do once fast and don't dwell on, or it gets its hooks in you. The light was going. Not setting, there was no sun to set, just a grayness leaching out of the sky like water out of a wrung rag, but going all the same. I had maybe an hour. In an hour the cold stops being mean and turns patient, and the patient cold and I had an old understanding. It had been trying to collect on me for years. I led Juno up out of the wash on the far side, where the snow had packed harder, and I started walking. Not riding, walking, breaking trail ahead of her with my legs to my knees in white, because a moving man stays warmer than a sitting one, and because I couldn't feel my left hand well enough to trust myself in the saddle. We went up. Up is generally a mistake in a storm. You want to get down to where the trees thicken and the wind quits, but the gully had turned me around and up was the only way I could read the slope. So up we went, the two of us, the fool and the crow, into the black timber. And that's where I smelled the smoke. I want you to understand what that meant. There was no ranch up there, no line shack. The high valleys of the Quill River country are empty, too steep for cattle, too far from water that didn't freeze, too mean in winter for anybody but a hermit or a corpse. I'd ridden that range 20 years, and I'd have sworn on my mother's grave there wasn't a chimney within 9 miles of that ridge. But wood smoke doesn't lie. The wind carried it thin and quick, gone almost before I caught it, that sweet sharp pine and dash smell that means somewhere, somehow, somebody had a fire. A fire means walls. Walls mean living. I turned Juno toward it like a sunflower turns to morning. It took the better part of an hour to find it, and I only found it then because I'd given up looking with my eyes and started using my nose like a hound, stopping every few steps to test the air. The cabin sat back in a fold of the mountain so cunningly that I walked past it twice. Somebody had built it where the timber grew thickest, where a granite shoulder of the peak threw a windbreak over it, where the trees came down close on 3 sides like a hand cupped around a candle flame. It wasn't hidden by accident. A body had to want to disappear to build a house in a place like that. You don't tuck yourself that far back into the dark unless you're hiding from something, weather or men or a memory or all three. The cabin was small, smaller than my own bunkhouse. Stout-built, though, the logs chinked tight, the roof steep so the snow would shed, a low lean-to off the side where I could hear something stamp and blow that I took for a cow or a mule. One window shuttered, a door, and from the chimney that thread of smoke, the only soft thing in all that hard white country. I'll tell you the truth about what I felt, because the stories never do. I didn't feel saved. I felt afraid. A man alone in a storm wants shelter more than he wants his next breath, but a man who's lived long enough knows that the worst things that ever happened to him happened indoors with other people, and that a closed door can hold a welcome or a gun, and you don't know which till it opens. I stopped Juno a good ways back. I took off my glove with my teeth and I held up my one good hand empty, the way you do to show a body you mean no harm. And I called out, my voice gone to gravel from the cold, "Hello, the house. I'm a friend. I'm lost and I'm hurt and my horse is done in. I don't want nothing but to stand by your fire till the storm breaks." Nothing, the wind, the trees creaking. I called again. "I'll bide outside if that suits you. I'll bide in the lean-to with the stock. I can't go no further, and that's the plain truth of it." The door didn't open, but the shutter did a crack, an inch, and I saw the dull dark eye of a rifle barrel come through it and steady on my chest. "You stop right there," a voice said. A woman's voice. I have heard frightened voices in my life, and I have heard angry ones, and I have heard the flat dead voices of men who have made up their minds to do murder and feel nothing about it. Hers was none of those. Hers was the voice of somebody so tired she'd come out the other side of fear into something colder and steadier. Somebody who'd already decided, a long time ago, exactly what she'd do if a man ever came up that mountain, and was now simply, quietly doing it. "I see you," she said. "I see you got one hand hid in your coat. You bring it out slow or I put a hole in you and let the snow have the rest." "It's hurt, ma'am," I said. "My wrist, I fell. I'll bring it out just slow like you say." And I did, and I near cried at the pain of it, and I held both my poor frozen hands up in the gray light. "There, that's all of me. There's nothing else." The barrel didn't move. "You alone," she said. "Alone as a man can be." "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me. I was after strays for the Hollies outfit down the South Fork. I lost the trail in the snow. I lost most everything in the snow." I tried to laugh and it came out wrong. "I'm not even sure I didn't lose my good sense somewhere back there too, ma'am, but if I did I'd be obliged if you didn't shoot me for it." A long quiet. The wind shoved a fistful of snow against the side of the cabin and the trees groaned. And behind that, and this is the moment the whole rest of my life turned on, though I didn't know it yet, behind all that wind and cold, from inside those tight-chinked walls, I heard a sound that didn't belong on a lonesome mountain. I heard a baby cry. Just one thin note of it quick before somebody hushed it. But I heard it. And then I heard another lower fussing, the way the second one always answers the first. Two, there were two. I looked at that rifle barrel and I looked at the smoke, and I thought about what kind of person hides a house this far up the dark side of a mountain, alone, with two little ones, through a winter that was killing grown men in their own dooryards down in the valley. And something in me, some old tiredness of my own, some part of me that had written its own farewell in a tally book an hour before, just gave out. "Ma'am," I said, and my voice broke on it, and I didn't try to hide that it broke. "I got no quarrel with you. I got no want of anything you have. I got a hurt hand and a half-froze horse, and I'm so cold I can't feel my own feet, and there's bobbies in there I just heard, and I swear before God I'd sooner walk back out into that storm and let it finish what it started than be the cause of 1 minute's grief to you or them. You point me which way to go and I'll go. But if there's a corner of that lean-to you can spare, I'll be gone before the snow stops, and you'll never know I was here, and you'll never see me again. That's my whole offer. I got nothing to give but my word, and I know my word ain't worth much to a stranger looking down a gun barrel." I don't know how long she looked at me through that crack in the shutter. Long enough that the cold got down into the marrow of me, and I started to shake so hard I had to lean on Juno to stand. Long enough that I thought, well, that's it then. She's going to let me freeze, and I can't even rightly blame her. Then the shutter closed, and I shut my eyes and got ready to die polite. But it wasn't the shutter that decided it, it was the door. It opened, not wide, just enough, and she stood in it, and I got my first real look at her. She was younger than her voice. That surprised me. The voice had sounded like a woman who'd buried a husband and outlived her own hope, but the face was a young woman's face, maybe 25, hollowed out at the cheeks the way hunger hollows a face, with hair the color of dark honey scraped back hard under a kerchief and eyes that didn't have one soft thing left in them. She had a shawl wrapped twice around her shoulders, gray wool gone thin at the elbows. The rifle was still in her hands. It was an old Henry, well kept. Somebody had taught her to keep a gun and to use it, and I had no doubt at all she could. She looked at me a long minute. Then she looked at Juno, head down and shivering. Then she looked back at me, and something moved behind her eyes, not softening. I won't lie and say softening, but a kind of weighing. A woman doing arithmetic, counting the cost of letting me die against the cost of letting me live. "The mare goes in the lean-to," she said at last. "There's a stall. There's hay, not much. She'll have to share with the cow, a beat. You'll bed down in the lean-to too, not in the house. You don't come in the house. You understand me. You don't so much as look in a window of the house." "Yes, ma'am." "I'll bring you out a blanket and somewhat to eat. You'll keep your fire low and away from the timber, and come first light, storm or no storm, you'll move on. Yes, ma'am, thank you, I thank you. She didn't say you're welcome. I think she'd have choked on it. She just stood there in the doorway with the rifle and the firelight behind her and the cold pouring past her into the house. And for 1/2 second, and maybe I imagined this, a freezing man imagines things. For 1/2 second her eyes flicked down to my hurt wrist where I held it against my chest, and something crossed her face that wasn't hardness at all. It was there and gone like the smoke. Then she stepped back and shut the door, and I heard the bar come down across it, solid, final. I got Juno into the lean-to. It was a near thing, my hands by then were about useless and the buckles of the saddle fought me, but I got her unsaddled and rubbed down with a handful of dry straw, and there was the cow, a placid old brindle thing who shuffled over to make room without being asked, the way cattle will. There was a little hay. Not much, the woman had said, and she hadn't lied. There was a winter's worth of careful hoarding in how little there was, and I gave most of my share of it to Juno and felt the guilt of it eating that woman's stores. There was a wooden pail with a skin of ice on it that I broke with my elbow, and Juno drank, and the cow drank, and I drank, and the water was so cold it hurt my teeth, and I have never in my life tasted anything so good. True to her word, the woman came out once more before full dark. She didn't come close. She set a bundle down in the snow 10 feet from the lean-to door and backed away from it, and the rifle was slung on her shoulder now, but her hand stayed near it. In the bundle was a horse blanket, worn but dry, and a tin cup of something hot, and a heel of bread so hard I had to soak it in the broth to gum it down. The broth was thin. Bones boiled and boiled again till there wasn't much left in them but the memory of meat. But it was hot, and it was salt, and it ran down into me like a live coal, and I sat in the straw with my back against Juno's warm flank and I drank it down, and I'll admit it to you, I did cry a little then. Quiet, so she wouldn't hear. A grown man, 51 years old, crying into a tin cup over a stranger's bone broth in a lean-to on the side of a freezing mountain. I think it was because of the bobbies. I'd given up on a lot of things in my life by then, given up on a wife, on children of my own, on most of the soft, warm, ordinary things other men seem to gather up so easy. And to come dragging half-dead up a mountain at the end of everything and hear, of all the sounds in the world, a baby crying behind a closed door, it does something to a man. It opens a thing in him he'd thought was scarred shut for good. I got my tally book out. My hands had thought enough to hold the pencil, and by the last gray of the light I wrote. Did not die. A woman saved me. She has 2 children up here alone and a gun she knows how to use and a cow and almost no hay and less food and the hardest eyes I ever saw on a living soul. She didn't have to open that door. There's something more than money she's afraid of to live where she lives. I don't know her name. I don't aim to ask. Come morning I'll go, but I don't think I'll be able to forget I was here. I underlined that last part. I don't know why. I've underlined maybe a dozen things in 50 years of tally books. That was one of them. The storm got worse in the night, not better. I lay in the straw between the horse and the cow, which is the warmest place God ever made if you don't mind the smell and the company, and I listened to the wind try to peel the roof off and fail, and I thought about the woman and the children on the other side of that wall. And I wondered what a person ran from that was worse than this. Worse than a winter that buried men alive. You don't choose this, the cold, the hunger, the long dark, the bobbies you can't even let cry too loud, over something easier unless the easier thing is a horror. And somewhere in the long middle of that night, when I was half asleep, and the wind had dropped for a moment the way it sometimes will, I heard her singing. Soft, so soft I had to hold my breath to catch it. Through the chinked logs, a thread of a tune, a lullaby maybe, the kind a mother sings not to wake a baby but to keep herself from going under. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. Some things a man's got no right to listen to. But I heard the shape of it, the rise and the fall, the way her voice cracked on the low notes the way it had cracked on You'll Move On, and I understood, lying there in the dark, that the hardness in her eyes wasn't the truth of her. It was the wall she'd built. And behind the wall was a person singing her children to sleep in a place where any other soul on earth would have laid down and quit. That's endurance, friend. Not the kind they put on a battlefield. The quiet kind. The kind nobody ever sees, that asks nothing and gets nothing and just goes on, and on, and on in the dark, because the alternative is letting go of the only thing you've got left to hold. I meant to leave at first light. I want you to know that. I was a man of my word and I'd given it, and a corner of the lean-to and a cup of broth don't buy a stranger a place in your trouble. But first light didn't come the way I figured. I woke before dawn the way old hands do, sharp, all at once, my breath smoking. The wind had quit entirely. That dead, total quiet that means the storm spent itself and dumped its whole load on the world. I sat up in the straw and Juno snorted and I rubbed the sleep and the cold out of my face with my good hand, and that's when I heard it. From the house. Not singing this time. A child crying, but wrong. Not the healthy outraged squall of a baby that wants feeding. A thin, weak, broken sort of crying, the kind that's got no strength behind it, the kind that scares the marrow out of you because it's the sound of something running down. And under it the woman's voice, and gone was all the flint, all the steel, all the you'll move on, the woman's voice high and fast and terrified, saying a name over and over, saying no, 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 please, not you too, saying the kind of words that come out of a body when the wall finally cracks all the way through. I was on my feet before I knew it. I went to the door of the lean-to and I stood there with my heart slamming because she'd told me, you don't come in the house, you don't so much as look in a window, and a man's word is a man's word. But there are things that come before a man's word. There are things that come before everything. That's how I knew how bad it was. A woman who'd held a rifle on me for hiding one hand in my coat, who'd made me swear off so much as looking at a window. That woman pulled the bar up off the door and stood back and let me walk into her house without a word, because she'd come to the end of the things she could carry alone, and somewhere in the long terror of that night, she'd decided a strange cowboy was a smaller risk than whatever was happening to her child. The inside of that cabin is burned into me. I could draw you the whole of it with my eyes shut. One room. A stone hearth with the fire built up high now, recklessly high, the way you build a fire when you've stopped caring about hoarding wood and started caring only about heat. A rope bed in the corner with a straw tick. A table, 2 stools, a few tins on a shelf, a churn, a wash basin. Bundles of dried something hanging from the rafters, sage, I thought, and yarrow, and a few I didn't know. A woman's whole world, swept clean and kept tight, every inch of it used, nothing wasted. The home of somebody who'd had to make a very little go a very long way for a very long time. And on the bed, in a nest of blankets, 2 children. The bigger one, a girl, maybe 2.5, 3, sat up wide-eyed and frightened and well, thank God, just frightened and well. It was the little one that was wrong. A baby, not much past a year, and even from the door I could see it. The high color in the cheeks that isn't health, the fast, shallow breathing. The way the small body had gone limp in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. A flush of fever coming off it I could near feel across the room. The woman went down on her knees by the bed. The rifle she'd set against the wall, set it down, in front of me, a thing she'd not have done the night before if I'd offered her gold for the privilege. He's been hot since the middle of the night, she said, and her voice had no walls left in it at all, it was just raw. He won't take the breast. He won't take water off a rag. He was crying and now he stopped crying and I don't know what to do. I've done everything I know. I've done it all twice. And she stopped, because the next thing in her throat was a sound no mother lets out in front of a stranger if she can help it, and she pressed the back of her wrist hard against her mouth to keep it in. I'm no doctor. I want to be plain about that, the way I was plain about the cliff. I've doctored horses and I've doctored cattle, and once I stitched a man's leg shut by lamplight with a sailmaker's needle and a great deal of whiskey. But I'd never in my life held a sick baby, and I felt the whole crushing uselessness of that come down on me right there in the doorway. But I'd seen fever break and I'd seen fever kill, in stock and in men. And there's a few things that hold true across all of God's creatures. So I came in slow, and I knelt down on the other side of the bed from her, keeping the bed between us, keeping it her child and not mine to touch unless she said, and I looked at the little one close. "Has he got the rash?" I asked. "Any place belly back?" She shook her head. "No rash." I looked. Pulling at his ears, coughing. "A little cough. Yesterday, not bad. It's the heat that come on so fast." "All right." I kept my voice the way I keep it with a colicky horse, low, even certain, even when I'm not certain at all, because half of doctoring anything is convincing the frightened ones that somebody in the room knows what's what. "All right. Fast fever in a little one, no rash. That's most often the kind that comes up hard and breaks just as hard if you can keep him cool and keep water in him. The danger's the heat itself when it climbs too high. We've got to bring it down. You got snow at the door and a creek that runs." "Frozen, there's snow." "Snow'll do. Snow's a gift right now." I looked at her. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to tell you to do some things that'll feel cruel. Stripping a hot baby down to nothing in a cold cabin feels like the wrongest thing in the world. But the blankets are holding the heat in him like a banked fire, and we got to let it out. You trust me that far?" She looked at me, and I watched her do the arithmetic again, the same weighing I'd seen in the doorway the night before, the cost of trusting against the cost of not, except this time the thing on the scale was her son. "Tell me what to do," she said. So we doctored him together, the two of us, all that long gray morning. We stripped him down. We made cloths of snow wrapped in rag and laid them at the back of his neck and under his little arms and the creases of his legs, where the blood runs close and the heat'll shed. We changed them as fast as they warmed, and there was a rhythm to it, her and me, a passing of cloths back and forth across that bed that turned into the only conversation we'd had that wasn't her behind a wall and me in front of it. "I got the dried yarrow down from the rafters." She nodded when I pointed, "Yes, that one. And steeped it weak in hot water and we cooled it and got a few drops at a time past his lips off a clean rag. Patient, so patient. Because a sick baby fights water like it's poison, and you can drown one easy as cure it if you go too fast." The bigger girl watched all this from the foot of the bed with her thumb in her mouth and her eyes never leaving her mother's face. After a while I dug in my coat and found the little carved horse I keep there, a thing I'd whittled years back, a fool's habit, a grown man carving toys, and I held it out to her across the room without a word. She looked at her mother. Her mother, not looking up from the baby, said, "It's all right, Tess. The man's all right." And the girl took it and turned it over in her small hands, and that was the first easing of anything in that cabin all morning. The fever broke a little after midday. You who have sat up with a sick child know the moment and don't need me to tell it. You who haven't, I can't make you feel it. But I'll try. The little one had been limp and far away, breathing too fast, hot as a stove lid for hours. And then there came a change so small you'd miss it if you weren't praying with your whole body for it. A shudder went through him, and he broke out in a sweat all over, slick and sudden. And his breathing eased down into something deeper, and he turned his head and made a cross-fussing noise that was the most beautiful sound I ever heard because it was a strong sound, an annoyed baby sound, a get-me-out-of-these-cold-rags sound. And his color came down. And his eyes, when they cracked open, found his mother and knew her. She made that sound then, the one she'd been holding back since the doorway. It came out of her in pieces, and she bent over her son and gathered him up sweaty and blinking off the bed and held him against her and rocked and made no apology for any of it. And I got up off my knees and went and stood by the fire and gave her the only privacy a one-room cabin can give, which is to turn your back and study the flames very hard. When she got hold of herself, she said, behind me, quiet, "I thought he was going to die. I had it fixed in my mind that he was going to die, and I was going to have to bury him in the snow because the grounds froze too deep to dig, and I'd already started thinking about where." I didn't turn around. "But he didn't," I said. "No," a long breath. "No, he didn't." then that's a place you don't have to think about anymore. You can put it down. I heard her settle the baby back in the nest of blankets, drowsy and mending now, the girl Tess curling in beside her brother with the carved horse clutched tight. And then I heard the woman come to stand a little ways off, and when I turned she was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her yet. Not the flint, not the terror, something in between and harder to name. The look of somebody deciding whether to hand over a thing they've been holding so long their hands cramped around it. "My name's Della," she said. "Della Voss. Those are mine, Tess, and the baby's Sam." A pause. I haven't said my own name out loud to a grown person in better than a year. "Wade," I said. "Wade Cullen. I run the home place for the Hollies outfit down the South Fork when I'm not falling into gullies and frightening widows." I let that sit a second. "You are a widow then." And there it was, the thing she was running from. I saw it cross her face before she said a word, and I near wished I hadn't asked. "I don't know," she said. "That's not an answer you expect." I waited. She went to the table and sat down on one of the stools like her legs had quit, and she looked at her hands and she told me. Not all at once. In pieces, the way the truth comes out of people who have kept it too long, sideways and out of order, and circling the worst part 3 times before landing on it. She'd married young, down in a valley town 2 ranges over, a town I knew the name of. Married a man named Royce Voss. And Royce Voss, it came clear as she talked, was one of those men who's charming as a spring morning to everybody outside his own door and a hard winter to everybody inside it. The kind that's generous with strangers and cruel with kin. The kind whose hand you have to learn to read the way you read weather, so you know when to be small and when to be gone. The first time he raised it to me, Tess wasn't even born yet, Della said, and she said it flat, looking at the table, the way you say a thing you've made yourself say so many times it's worn smooth. I told myself it was the once, the drink. They all tell themselves that, I think. And then it was twice, and then I quit counting, same as I quit hopping. She turned her wrist over and looked at it like it belonged to somebody else. When Sam was coming, it got worse. Some men can't stand it, a wife carrying, like it's a thing she's doing against them. I kept very still. There's a kind of listening a man's got to do at a moment like that, where the worst thing he can do is move, or make a sound, or do one single thing that might make her feel she's being judged or pitied or, God forbid, doubted. "I'd have stayed," she said, and her voice cracked on it, that same low-note crack I'd heard in the lullaby through the wall. "That's the shameful part. That's the part I can't. I'd have stayed and let him do as he liked to me till one of us died of it, because where does a woman go? With one baby and another coming and no money of her own and a whole town that thinks the sun shines out of Royce Voss. I'd have stayed." "What changed it?" She looked up at me then, and her eyes were dry, and that was somehow worse than tears. "He hit Tess," she said. "She was 2. She spilled the milk. She spilled the milk and she stopped, started again. And I stood there in my own kitchen with my own child screaming, and I watched myself not move because I'd got so used to not moving, and that was the moment I understood. I wasn't keeping us safe by staying small. I was teaching her to be small. I was raising my girl to marry a man like her father and call it love." She shook her head slow. "That night I took what I could carry and the children and Royce's own rifle and the cow because she gave milk, and I walked out while he slept off the drink, and I have been walking and hiding ever since." "How long?" 14 months. We were 3 months getting up here. I found this place, somebody built it long ago, a trapper maybe, it was half felon. I fixed what I could. I learned what I could. The valley folk don't come up this high, and Royce won't think to look up here. This is the last place on earth anybody'd think a woman take 2 bobbies. A grim flicker, almost a smile, the first I'd seen. I made it the last place anybody'd think. That was the whole idea. A place so hard nobody'd believe I'd choose it. And then the smile died, because she got to the part she'd been circling. "But he's looking," she said. "I know he's looking. A man like Royce, it isn't that he wants us back. It's that we're his and we left, and that can't be allowed, because if his woman can leave, then what's he? There's men carrying his money up and down these ranges asking after a woman traveling with 2 little ones. I heard it from a peddler I traded with at the low cabin in the fall before I came all the way up. He didn't know who I was. He just said there's a fella named Voss paying for word of his runaway wife, and the way he said runaway wife, like I was a horse that jumped a fence. Her jaw set. I'm not going back. I want you to understand that, Wade Cullen, since you're sitting in my house knowing my name. There is no power on this earth takes me or these children back down that mountain to that man. I will live up here till the cold takes us all before I do that. I've made my peace with it. I made my peace with it a long time ago. I sat down across from her. My wrist throbbed. The fire popped. The bobbies slept. And I understood finally and all the way down what I'd been looking at since the night before, why the eyes were so hard and the food so thin and the cabin so hidden and the rifle so ready. It wasn't a woman waiting out a winter. It was a woman who'd looked at every door life left her and found them all bad, and chosen the one that was hers to choose, even if it killed her, because at least it was chosen. Della, I said, I got to ask you something, and I want you to hear it as a question and not anything else. I waited till she met my eyes. Have you got enough to last the winter, truly? Not the brave answer, the true one. And the wall came down all the way then, because she was too tired to hold it, and because, I think, she'd waited 14 months for one single grown soul to ask her that and mean it. No, she said. Just that, no. The hardest word she'd said all day, harder than her husband's name. The hay won't see the cow to spring, she said. And without the cow there's no milk, and without milk Sam's too little for anything else, not really, not enough. The flour's near gone. I've been at the bottom of the flour barrel for a week, stretching it. There's some dried meat, and there's roots I dug in the fall, and there's what I can snare. But the deep snows come early and the snares come up empty more days than not, and the deer have gone down low where I can't follow without leaving sign, and she stopped, breathing hard. I have been doing arithmetic for a month, Wade. I'm good at arithmetic, and the arithmetic says we don't all three make it to spring on what's in this cabin. It says maybe 2 of us do if the third one, she couldn't finish it. But I knew how that sum ended. I'd seen the math in her eyes the night before, weighing my life against her stores. She'd been doing that math on her own children. A mother totting up the cold figures of how much was left and how many mouths and who. If it came to it, who? That's the morally heavy thing, friend. Not me, not any choice of mine, hers. A woman who'd carried her bobbies up the side of a killing mountain to keep them safe from one death had been sitting alone in the dark for weeks staring down the arithmetic of another, and making herself look at the unbearable bottom of the column, because looking away from it would have been a different kind of failing her children. And she would not fail them, not in any direction, not even the direction that broke her own heart to look at. I have known brave men. I have known men the whole territory called brave. Not one of them ever sat with a sum like that. All right, I said, and I heard my own voice come out steady, and I was glad of it. Then here's the arithmetic from where I sit, and you can check my figures because you're better at it than me. Down the South Fork, 8-9 miles as the crow goes, there's a Holly's line camp. Stocked for the winter flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, oats for stock. More'n a man could eat in a season, and it's mine to draw on. I keep the key and the count. There's hay there too, baled, a wagon load put up for the saddle stock that winters at the camp. I leaned forward. I can get to it. Maybe not today, the snow's too fresh and deep, but it'll settle and crust in a day or two, and then a man on a good mare can break through to it. I can bring back what'll see you and these children and that cow clean through to green grass, and nobody down the valley the wiser, because I'm the only soul who goes up to that camp before the spring gather. She was staring at me, and the hope that came into her face was a terrible thing to watch, because hope on a face that's gone that long without it doesn't look like joy. It looks like fear. It looks like a person afraid to pick up a thing in case it's snatched away. Why, she said, why would you? And I'll tell you, I didn't have a clean answer ready. I sat there with my hurt wrist and my whole long bachelor life behind me. All those soft, warm, ordinary things I'd given up on. And I thought about how I'd written my own farewell in a tally book the day before and meant it. How close I'd come to being just a frozen thing, the snow gave up in the spring, and how the only reason I was sitting warm in a cabin instead was that a half-starved woman with every reason in the world to let me die had opened her door anyway. Because you opened the door, I said. Last night. You didn't have to and you did, and it cost you. I could see what it cost you. A man pays his debts. That's the most of it. I rubbed my jaw. And the rest of it's that I'm 51 years old and I've spent my whole life looking after stock that gets sold and fences that fall down and other men's cattle, and I never once in all that time got to look after anything that mattered. I'm not asking anything of you, Della. I want that clear as the creek. I'm not your husband, and I'm not trying to be, and I'm not after a single thing you're afraid I'm after. I'm a hired man with a key to a full larder 8 miles off and a woman and 2 bobbies up a mountain who'll die without it. That's the whole arithmetic. The rest is just doing the sum. She put her face in her hands, not crying past crying the way you get, just holding her own head up for a minute because nobody else had in 14 months. When she took her hands down, she said, "If he finds I had help, if Royce ever learns a man came up here and he won't learn it from me, and I'll come and go careful. I've been reading weather and hiding sign on this range 20 years, Della. I'm good at not being seen when I've a mind to. You'd be surprised." "You found me," she said. "You weren't even looking and you found me." That stopped me, because she was right, and it was the one crack in the whole plan, and we both heard it land. "I smelled your smoke," I said slowly. "In a blizzard. A man who wasn't lost and half dead and using his nose like a hound would have ridden right on by and never known you were here. That's the truth. But it's also true that any other day with a wind from another quarter." I didn't finish. Didn't need to. Her face had already gone where mine was going. "He's got men on the ranges," she said quietly, "and winters when smoke shows farthest and travels longest." We sat with that. The fire ticked. Outside, the dead still cold held the whole white mountain in its fist, and somewhere down below it, miles off and patient as the cold itself, a man who thought he owned her had men out reading the country for a woman's chimney smoke. "Then we don't give him time," I said. "I go for the supplies soon as the snow'll bear me. I bring up enough that you can run a cold camp if you have to, eat what doesn't need a fire, keep the smoke down to nothing on the days the wind's wrong. We make you able to disappear even from a man who's looking. That's the new arithmetic." I looked at her. "Can you hold here 2 days, 3 at the outside? Sam's mending. The hail stretch that far if the cow goes short." "I've held 14 months, she said. "I can hold 3 days. And there, God help me, there was the smile again, the real one this time, small and tired and fierce, the smile of a woman who'd been doing a sum alone in the dark for a month, and had just, for the first time, been handed a figure that made the column come out on the side of live. I should have felt good. I did feel good. But I'm an old hand, and old hands know that the moment you let yourself believe the arithmetic's turned your way is exactly the moment the weather changes. I went out to sea to Juneau that evening with the light going violet over the snow, and I stood by the lean-to a minute, breathing the cold, clean air, looking down the long white fall of the mountain toward the valleys I couldn't see. And far off, so far off I told myself I'd imagined it, the way a freezing man imagines things, down in the blue dark where the timber thinned toward the low country. I thought I saw, just for a moment, the small orange wink of a fire that wasn't ours. I watched the spot a long time. It didn't come again. The dark came down and took it if it was ever there. I didn't tell Della that night. I've turned that over 1,000 times since, whether I should have. She'd earned every truth there was. But she'd had one day, one single day in 14 months, where the sum came out live, and where a sick child mended in her arms, and where she'd said her own name out loud and had it heard. I figured she could have the one night before I gave the mountain back its teeth. I went in. She'd made coffee, real coffee, the last of it, a thing she'd been hoarding and spent on me, and I knew better than to refuse it, though it near broke me to drink her down to nothing. The bobbies slept. The fire was low and good, And for a little while in that hidden cabin at the top of the killing cold, it was almost warm, and it was almost safe, and it was almost like the thing I'd given up on so long ago I'd forgot the shape of it. I got out my tally book before I slept. I wrote, Sam's fever broke. Her name is Della. She did not run from weather. She ran from a man, and she is braver than any soul I have known, and the bravest thing she ever did was the arithmetic. Going for the line camp supplies soon as the snow bears. 3 days, maybe. And then I sat a long while with the pencil over the page, and the fire ticking, and the bobbies breathing, and that far orange wink burning behind my eyes. It had done what mountain snow does when the cold settles deep and the sun comes thin and brief. It had crusted. A hard rind formed over the soft, thick enough by the third dawn that Juno could pick her way across the top of it more often than she broke through, and where she broke through, it was to her knees and not her chest. That's the window you wait for. Too soon and the horse founders belly deep and you kill her. Too late and the next storm buries the crust under fresh soft and you start over. The third morning was the morning. I'd read it right, and I was glad, because I'd had 2 days to sit with that far orange wink of fire and let it grow teeth in my mind, and I wanted to be moving. I hadn't told Della about the fire. I'd told myself a dozen reasons and known all of them for what they were. But before I left, I told her something near enough to the truth that I could live with it. You keep that rifle to hand, I said, cinching the saddle in the gray dark of the Linta while she held the lantern. And you keep the smoke down low while I'm gone. Burn only the driest wood, only what won't smoke, and only when you must. If the wind comes round out of the south, I stopped, because she was already nodding, already ahead of me. Smoke travels farthest on a south wind in cold air, she said. I know. I've kept this fire 14 months without anybody finding it but a lost man who fell in a hole. A flicker of that fierce, tired smile. You think I haven't watched the wind every day of my life up here? No, I said. I expect you've watched it closer than I ever did. And that was the plain truth. She walked me out into the snow. The bobbies were still asleep, bundled deep. The morning was that hard violet blue you only get when the cold so deep the air itself seems to ring. She looked up at me in the saddle, and there was a thing she wanted to say and couldn't find the door for it. And finally she just put her bare hand flat against Juno's shoulder. Not on me, on the mare. The way you bless a thing you're sending into danger, and she said, Come back, Wade Cullen. 3 days, I said. 2 if the camp's how I left it, I'll come back. I rode down the dark side of the mountain into the timber, and I didn't look back, because a man who looks back makes promises with his eyes he might not get to keep. I'll be brief about the going, because the going wasn't the story. It was hard and it was cold and it was slow, and twice the crust let me down into washes I had to fight Juno out of, and my bad wrist screamed the whole way, and somewhere in the second hour, the brave, foolish part of me that had ridden up into a blizzard after strays finally lay down and died for good. And what was left was just an old man and a tired mare going careful down a killing slope, because there were 3 lives at the top of it that the math said needed flour and hay. I reached the Hollies line camp by early dark. It was as I'd left it in the fall, the cabin shut tight, the storehouse padlocked, the baled hay under its lean-to roof. I broke the ice in the trough for Juno, forked her down a good feed of the camp's oats, the first full belly she'd had in days, and she forgave me at last. I felt it in the way she leaned her head into my chest. I built a fire and ate the first hot meal I'd had since the broth, and I slept the dead sleep of a body that spent everything. In the morning, I loaded what I could. This was its own kind of arithmetic, and I did it careful, the way Della would have. A horse can carry a deal, but a horse breaking trail uphill through crusted snow can carry far less, and the whole thing was worthless if I foundered Juno and left her dead in a drift with the load scattered. So I weighed it out. Flour, most of a sack, decanted into 2 smaller ones to balance the load and to leave the camp's count looking less robbed if anyone checked, which they wouldn't, but old habits. Beans. Salt pork, a good slab of it because Sam would soon want more than milk and the others were starving slow on bone broth. Salt. Coffee, I'll confess I took her coffee, a whole tin of it, and felt no guilt at all. Lard, a small sack of oats and a fair bite of the baled hay, lashed in a tight roll, the most I dared for the cow, with a promise to myself I'd come again for more once the trail was broke and known. And one thing more, that wasn't food. There was a box in the storehouse where the camp kept its odds, cartridges, a spare axe head, a few traps. I took a box of cartridges that fit the Henry. I'd seen the make of her rifle and I knew the load, and a woman alone on a mountain with a man's hired killers maybe reading the country for her smoke does not need flour half so bad as she needs to know she'll not run dry. I started back up in the cold blue dawn of the 5th day, since I'd fallen in the gully. And the 5th day was the day the weather changed. Not the sky. The sky held hard and clear and merciless. It was the other weather, the kind an old hand feels in the back of his neck before he can name it. I was 3 hours up the slope, Juno laboring under the load and me walking ahead breaking trail when I came on the tracks. Shod horses, 2 of them, crossing my old trail at an angle headed up and east toward the high country, toward the fold of the mountain where the timber grew thickest. Fresh tracks, made that morning maybe an hour ahead of me, the broken crust not yet glazed over in the cold. I stood over those tracks a long time with my heart going slow and heavy, and I knew, a man knows, there is no honest reason for 2 shod horses to be climbing toward the dark side of that mountain in the dead of the worst winter in memory. No strays were up there, no line camp, no trapper's run. Nothing up there at all but one hidden cabin with a thread of smoke, and a woman who'd been right that smoke travels farthest in cold air on a south wind. And the wind, I realized, standing there, the wind had come round out of the south 2 nights gone, the very night I'd left her, and I'd told her to keep the smoke down, but you cannot keep 2 bobbies warm through a mountain night on no fire at all. They'd found the smoke. I left the hay. I want that set down because it tells you the size of the thing. I cut the hay roll loose and dropped it in the snow, the hay I'd half killed my mare to carry, the hay that stood between the cow and Spring and between Sam and the milk that kept him alive. I dropped it without a second's thought, because hay is a spring problem and what was happening up that mountain was a now problem, and you cannot save a life in the spring if it ends this morning. I kept the cartridges. I lightened Juno to nothing but the cartridges and the cinch in me, and I climbed into the saddle, and I asked that good tired mare for everything she had left. She gave it, God love her, she gave it. I'll not pretend I caught them on the trail. I didn't. They had the start of me and they weren't carrying an old man's guilt and a load of fear up the mountain. They were just 2 hired men following smoke, with no idea yet what they were riding toward, which was their one mistake and the only thing that gave Della her chance. Because they thought they were coming for a runaway wife, a thing to be collected. They did not understand, could not have understood, men like that never can, that the woman they were coming for had sat alone in the dark and done the arithmetic on her own children's lives and made her peace with the bottom of the column, and that there is nothing on this earth, nothing, more dangerous than a person who has already decided what she will die for and stopped being afraid. I came over the last shoulder of the slope into the fold of the mountain with Juno blown and stumbling, and the cabin came into view through the black timber, and I heard the shot before I saw anything. One shot, flat and hard, rolling away across the snow. Then, and this is the part I have never been able to tell without my voice going, then a long, terrible quiet. I came down off Juno at a run and fell and got up and ran, floundering through the crust, the cartridge box gone from my hand somewhere, my own old pistol that I'd half forgot I carried out, and in my fist. I came around the granite shoulder into the cabin's little clearing. Here is what I saw. I'll give it to you plain, the way it was, and let you make of it what you will, because I have made 100 things of it over the years and I'm not done yet. There were 2 horses, ground-tied, blowing by the timber's edge. There was a man down in the snow before the cabin door, not moving, a dark shape spreading slow beneath him into the white. And there was a second man. And this one was alive. This one was on his feet, backing away from the cabin door with his hands coming up empty and open. Backing away from the doorway where Della Voss stood with the Henry rifle to her shoulder, and the dead steady look of a woman who has already counted the cost of everything. She did not look at me. She did not, I think, even know yet that I was there. The whole of her was that doorway and that rifle and the man backing away from it, and behind her in the dark of the cabin I could hear, thank God, I could hear Tess crying, which meant Tess was alive, which meant the shot had not gone where my heart had feared it. You go back down, Della was saying. Her voice was the one from the first night, the flint one, but underneath the flint now there was something else, something that had burned all the way through fear and out the other side into a cold I'd not heard even from her. You go back down and you tell him. You tell Royce Voss I am not his. These children are not his. And the next man who climbs this mountain I will not waste a word on. You understand me. You tell him I have all the winter in the world to wait for him and a rifle that don't miss twice and nothing left to lose, and you ask him does he? You ask him is it worth his life, to own a thing that won't be owned? She tipped the barrel, just slightly, toward the horses. Now you take your partner up off my doorstep and you ride, and you do not look back, because if you look back I will think you changed your mind. The man looked at her. He looked at the shape in the snow. He looked, and now he saw me and saw the pistol, and saw I'd put myself between him and the timber without quite meaning to, and whatever arithmetic he was doing came out fast and clean on the side of living. He got his partner up. The man in the snow wasn't dead, I saw then. She put it through his shoulder, high and hard. A shot to stop and not to kill, which I have thought about a great deal since. What it costs a person to choose that in a moment like that, to aim for the shoulder when the heart is right there and your children are behind you. The wounded man cursed and groaned and got slung over his saddle, and the other mounted, and they went down the mountain into the timber, and Della Voss stood in her doorway with the rifle up and tracked them every yard until the trees took them, and then for a good while after, until even she had to believe they were truly gone. Then the rifle came down, and she turned and saw me, and for one moment the whole thing she'd been holding up, the flint, the cold, the woman who don't miss twice, for one moment all of it just fell off her face at once, and what was left underneath was a girl of 25 who had just, alone with her bobbies behind her, faced down 2 armed men and her own worst fear and the whole long arithmetic of her life, and won, and could not yet believe she was still standing. They came at first light, she said. Her teeth had started to chatter. Now that it was over, the body does that, holds steady through the worst and falls apart in the after. I had the fire low. I did everything but the wind. 2 nights back the wind came round south and I couldn't keep Sam warm without. I knew. I knew when I smelled my own smoke on the south wind that morning. I knew it was carrying and I've been waiting. I've been sitting in that doorway since before dawn every day waiting. I knew you'd not have left me the way to be ready if you didn't think. She stopped, looked at me hard. You saw a fire down low before you left, didn't you? I could have lied. I'd half lied to her once already and lived with it. But she just earned every truth there ever was, all over again, and I was done holding anything back from Della Voss. I saw a fire, I said. 2 nights before I went, I didn't tell you. I told myself it was so you could have one night where the sum came out right. My voice wasn't steady. I was wrong. I should have told you and let you be the one to choose what to do with it. It was yours to know. I'm sorry. She looked at me a long moment, and I braced for the flint because I'd earned that too. But it didn't come. You came back, she said instead. You heard the shot and you came back up a mountain at a dead run on a blown horse, toward the guns, not away. A man who meant me ill, or even a man who just meant himself well, he'd have heard that shot and turned for the valley and called it none of his business. She let out a breath that shook. You came up, so I'll trade you. You shouldn't have kept the fire from me, and I'll not pretend it sits easy. But I'm still standing in this doorway, and so are you, and my children are alive behind me. I find I can carry one wrong choice from a man who rode toward the guns. I've carried worse from men who ran the other way. And then her legs went, the way they had after Sam's fever broke, and I caught her, the rifle and all. And she let me, for just a moment, let an old cowboy hold her up in the snow while the worst of the shaking passed through her. And then she straightened on her own, because she was Della Voss, and she finished standing up under her own power or not at all. We went inside to the children. I'll spare you most of the rest of that day, because it was just the slow, ordinary work of the after, settling the terrified bobbies, getting the fire built up now that there was no more reason on God's earth to hide the smoke, hauling in the supplies off poor Juno, who I turned into the linta with the cow and an apology and the last of the camp's oats. Della and I didn't talk much. There wasn't a need. You don't after. You just move around each other doing the work, and every now and then your eyes meet across the room, and something passes that's bigger than any word for it. But I'll tell you the two things from that day I've kept. The first is that along about dusk, with the fire high and Sam asleep and Tess finally calmed enough to be playing again in the corner with my carved horse, Della sat down across the table from me and said, "Quiet, he'll not come himself. Royce, you should know that since you're in it now. He'll send men when the snow goes, more of them and meaner, because his own man came home shot, and that's a humiliation, and humiliation's the only thing he feels deeper than spite." She turned her cup in her hands. "I bought the winter today. I didn't buy the war. Come spring, this isn't over." "I know it," I said. "I've been thinking on it the whole afternoon." And I had. "There's law down the valley, Della. Not in Royce's town, he owns that one, but 2 counties over there's a marshal I've known 30 years, a hard old honest man, and there's such a thing as a woman swearing out against a husband for what he did, especially with a man like me to stand witness to the marks I never saw but the doctor down there could, and the men he's hired, and a child he struck. It's not a sure thing. The law mostly takes the man's side, and you know it better than me, but it's a thing, it's a door. And come spring, when the trail's open, there might be more doors to choose from than just stay hid till he comes again." I spread my hands. "I'm not telling you which door. God knows I learned my lesson about choosing for you. I'm just telling you there's more than one now. That's all the supplies I can bring up that matter." She didn't answer right off. She looked into the fire a long while, and then she said something I've never forgot. "For 14 months, she said, the only arithmetic I had was subtraction, how much was left, how much was gone, how long till there was nothing." She looked up at me. "You're the first person in a long time who said a single thing on the other side of the line. I'd forgot a sum could have an ad in it, a breath. I'm not saying yes to any door yet, Wade Cullen. I'll choose come spring, and I'll choose for myself. But I'll hold the thought. That's more than I've let myself do in a long time. The second thing I kept is smaller. It's only this. That night late, with the storm starting up again outside soft and steady, and the cabin warm and full of the smell of real coffee and salt pork, I heard her singing. The lullaby, through no wall this time, me on a pallet by the door where I belonged, her in the corner with the bobbies, the same tune I'd heard that first night through the chinked logs, the one that cracked on the low notes. Except it didn't crack this time. She sang it all the way through, low and clear and whole, and Tessa's small voice came in on the parts she knew, and Sam slept, and the fire ticked, and outside the patient cold pressed its face against the window, and for that one night did not get in. I left 2 days after, when the trail had set again. I went back down for the hay I'd dropped and found it and brought it up, and 3 more loads after that across the back end of the winter, careful as a thief, until I was sure that whatever else came in the spring it would not be hunger. I built up the linta so the cow and Juno's could winter better. I taught Tess to whittle. I never once crossed a line Della didn't draw first, and she drew them slow, and fewer as the snow began to soften, and I was content with that, more content than I'd been in 20 years, because for the first time in my long, useless, capable life I was looking after something that mattered. The marshal 2 counties over is an honest man. I've sent him word. Spring's coming on now down in the valleys. The south slopes are showing brown, though the high cabin's still locked in white. Royce Voss has not been quiet. There are things moving down below that I have not yet told Della all of, because I learned my lesson about that, And so I'll tell her every word tonight and let her choose what we do with it, the way it's hers to choose. I keep my tally book still. I wrote in it last night, by the same fire, with the same Bobby sleeping and the same woman watching the same wind. I wrote down the count of the hay and what the marshal sent word of, and how the snow was going on the south slope. And at the bottom I started to write what I thought would come in the spring, and what I hoped, and what I feared, and how it might all fall out for the four of us when the trail opened, and Royce Voss learned his hired man had come home shot from a mountain he'd been told held nothing but a frightened runaway. But I stopped, because Della had come to stand behind me, reading over my shoulder the way she'd never once have let herself do that first hard night, and she put her hand on the page flat, over the line I was writing. "Don't write the spring yet," she said. "We don't know it yet, write the winter, we earn the winter." So I crossed out what I'd started, and I wrote one line instead and underlined it, the way I do. And then I closed the book, because some things a man's got no right to set down before they've happened, and some sums you don't get to do until the figures are in, and there are doors in spring that none of us could see from the dark side of that mountain in the snow.